Good evening, everybody. This is Ed Mann, Director of Training at Provident. Bear with us a minute or two. We're having some technical issues getting our presenter logged into Zoom tonight for some reason, an issue we've never had before. How about a show of hands for those people that can hear me? Okay, like I said, just bear with us. Our marketing director is working with our presenter tonight to get him logged in. For some reason, we're having some issues with Zoom this evening. While we're waiting on Sam to try to get Chief LeDuc logged in, I'm going to go ahead and go through some slides with you quickly. The typical Provident insurance program slides that we do at the beginning of every one of our programs. So Provident started in 1902 in the Pittsburgh area as an independent insurance agency. In 1928, the owners of the company saw a need in the Pittsburgh area for volunteer firefighters to be covered in some type of custom blanket accident and health policy. So if they got hurt while they were doing their work as volunteers, they had some kind of recourse and had some way to support themselves if they were losing revenue because they couldn't work. Today, we provide volunteer combination of career firefighters and emergency medical responders with a multitude of programs. We have our accident and health policy in all states except one right now, and we also have some policies in Canada. We also offer a special risk and transportation insurance programs. Provident is celebrating its 5th consecutive year as being named one of the top insurance places to work by the Insurance Business Magazine. So our accident and health program offers income protection, a line of duty death benefit, among a lot of other benefits if you have an accident health policy with us. We have a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment policy, which enables you to provide, if you will, an added benefit to your members. This policy would cover them on duty or off duty. So if you had somebody that was out hunting and fell out of their tree stand and died, it would pay a benefit to their family. We have a group term life insurance policy available, critical illness and cancer policy, which covers cancer, renal failure, heart attack, and stroke, and it pays an actual living benefit. And then, of course, we have our property and casualty insurance. And I want to back up to the accident and health. If you're an accident and health client, your members and their immediate family have access to our 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week first responder assistance program, where you can make a toll-free call and get counseling from some certified clinicians. And then under our Fire Plus policy, if you're a client, your fire department would be entitled to be able to use our Fire Plus Academy, which is an online training platform available to our customers at no charge through Fire Rescue One, which is now part of Lexipol. Tonight, as you know, we rescheduled from earlier, and tonight we're going to cover surviving the fire service addressing occupational health with Chief Todd LeDuc, who's the Chief Strategy Officer for LifeScan Wellness. Now, it looks like Sam's still having some issues, so let's do this. Since I covered some things about our policy, if anybody has some questions, let me see if I can take any questions you might have. I'm going to get rid of these slides here. I'm going to stop sharing and get rid of the slides. So if anybody has any questions about any of the things I covered with our policies, we're getting closer to getting Chief LeDuc signed in. Please bear with us. I apologize. We all apologize. If anybody has any questions, you can ask them in chat if you'd like right now. Again, I apologize. We're working the technical issue. Hang with us. I know many of you have already worked a full day and now you're waiting for this webinar. I see my old friend Al Wickline is online tonight. Connie Holt's on tonight. I see some names I recognize. There we go. Looks like Todd's getting ready to connect to the audio. There we go. All right. So while we were working on the technical issues, I took care of our slides that we usually go through. So to our listeners, Todd, can you hear me okay?
I can, Chief. How are you?
All right, and I can hear you as well. So tonight, I already got through all this. I had the pleasure tonight to introduce Chief Todd LeDuc, the Chief Strategy Officer for LifeScan Wellness. I've known Chief LeDuc for several years through the International Association of Fire Chief Health, Safety, and Survival section, and work that the Chief and I were able to do with the NFFF related to the Everyone Goes Home program. I've also had the pleasure and the opportunity to participate in several programs the Chief has presented nationally. And to say that he is a proponent of health and safety of firefighters would be an understatement. I'm hopeful we'll have plenty of questions, and we're asking you to use the question feature and send your questions. We'll make every effort to answer all of them. However, if we don't get to your specific question, we'll get you answers via email in the days following the webinar. In a few minutes, like very shortly, since I've already reviewed the introductory slides, I'm going to have Chief LeDuc introduce himself and start with his presentation. Chief LeDuc, tell our listeners about yourself and what you do now.
Hey, Chief, thank you for having me on. I apologize. I know we've had technical difficulties tonight. In fact, I think I'm going to actually just extemporaneously do this. I do this in my sleep. So I'm gonna walk us through kind of the three legs of a stool that are compromising our survival in the fire service. But you mentioned you and I have known each other for a long time. I value our friendship. A little bit about myself. I've got 34 years in the fire service. Started out in New England, spent the last 30 retiring as the executive assistant chief in Broward County, Florida, a metro department with a population of about 2,900,000 members serving. And now I'm with LifeScan, as you mentioned, and we're the largest provider of firefighter physicals. Let's jump right into this. I want to really just keep this simple tonight because I think it really is simple in terms of what's impacting our survival. At least from an occupational health standpoint. And when you look at our death and disabilities, that continues to be what's driving our morbidity and our mortality. So I'm going to take each of the three legs of the stool one at a time. The elephant in the room, and I don't know if it's always been there and we just haven't recognized it sufficiently, or if the research has helped us appreciate it in the last decade or so. But is firefighter cancer, right? So we know if you take firefighting out of the equation, about 40% of us, when I say us, of the United States general population, so 4 out of every 10 members of the general population is going to be afflicted with cancer during their lifetime. And obviously, as we age, that risk increases genetically. Some of us are predisposed to that by family and genes. I call it off the fire ground risk, but we know that certain lifestyle factors, smoking, excess alcohol, obesity, nutrition, physical fitness, those all contribute. So if you look at that, that's a pretty profound statistic. 4 out of every 10 Americans are going to get cancer. And then if we lay on top of that, firefighters and what we do, the risk we're exposed to. So we know that the byproducts of combustion today are much different than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Fires are burning faster, hotter. The products that are interior within the structures that we're fighting are even more complicated. We have products from unregulated overseas that we don't know what the burn off is. We've got big issue now is lithium ion battery fires with electronic vehicles. So we know that there's a large number of byproducts of combustion that really are driving the risks that are on top of the firefighter element, in addition to our general population. So another compounding factor of that is when we overlay the firefighter risk on top of the general population risk, we know from the NIOSH study, so that was the largest study done on firefighters in the country by NIOSH. It had 3 departments, Philadelphia, Chicago, and San Francisco, about 35,000 firefighters total. And what we found was when you lumped all the cancers together, so you looked at overall rate of cancer in firefighters, knowing that 40% of firefighters, 40% of general population are going to be afflicted. What we found was firefighters had about a 9% higher rate than that. So, you take 9% of 40%, and you're getting close to 1 out of every 2 firefighters. So what we know in addition from that study is the mortality was about 14% higher. So what does that mean? It means firefighters have a 14% higher risk of death from the specific cancers that they're afflicted with. So it tells us more research obviously needs to be done, but the cancers are more aggressive. They're caused by exposures, compounded by we're still members of the general population, so compounded by our lifestyle and other risk factors such as genetics. So it tells us we are at a higher prevalence of 1, higher rates of exposure, and 2, worse outcomes. So we've got to keep that in mind with how we tackle this problem, how aggressive we are with it. And I want to just kind of touch on what that looks like. And we're going to share, I know we had some technical issues, and I apologize on my end for those. We're going to share when we send out an update in the recording, the slides, so everyone will have a beautiful image. But we know the 9% increase in risk and the 14% mortality increase. But then we've got specific cancers. In the NIOSH study showed us that, those are melanomas, testicular cancer, prostate cancer, brain cancer, colon cancer, skin, and several others that we have a much elevated risk than general population. So we're told that's being driven by the actual products of combustion that we're exposed to. So that's the Debbie Downer, I guess.
So I just want to make sure for our listeners to understand, because of the technical issues, Todd's not going to bring his slides up tonight, but we will have the slides available to you when Sam sends the email out tomorrow. It'll be in a PDF, so they'll actually be able to see the slides. Okay. But the last thing we want to do is try to bring his slides up, run into another technical issue right now. So we'll let Todd go without the slides tonight, but you will have the slides tomorrow or the day after when Sam gets an email to our listeners.
Absolutely. And Ed, thanks for clarifying that. And my contact will be in there. I'm happy to talk one-on-one with anyone as well from tonight's presentation. So the upside of this is the treatment modalities. We've made great advances in the treatment and survival from cancer. So if you look at, say, several decades ago, overall cancer survival was about 50%. When you look at a snapshot of even 10 years ago, we're close to 70%. So we're making tremendous inroads in the treatment and survivability of cancer. There's a couple things we need to do to help continue to move that needle, if you will. So one is, we know that our bunker gear was designed to protect us from thermal radiation, not from carcinogens being deposited on our skin and subsequently absorbed into our body. So gear is one issue. We need to obviously wear the gear when we're in extreme firefighting hazard in an ideal HL environment. But we also need to be mindful that the gear gets contaminated. Those contaminants go through the gear and into the skin. So decontamination has to be right at the top of our mind. So we get in, we knock down the fire. We have to be on respiratory protection 100% of the time. And then the gear has to come off as soon as we're out of that environment. And then decontamination needs to start immediately. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about that, Ed. I think when you look at decontamination, we know in a fire scene, our pores are expanded and wide open, our core temperature is elevated, our heart rate's up, our blood pressure's up. And so we're absorbing all those chemicals that have come through the gear and on our skin. So we need to take a more aggressive stance and very timely. And I very much appreciate the shower within the hour and wash your hood on Sunday. But in my humble opinion, it needs to really be elevated to when this carcinogen product gets on our gear, goes into our skin, and then goes into our bloodstream and lymphatic system. We need to really aggressively and timely go to work to mitigate that. So that includes everything from wipes on the skin. Decontamination wipes have been shown to reduce a significant amount of absorption. Cleaning of the skin with gross and fine decontamination. And trust me, I've heard, I grew up in Boston. I know in the Northeast, it's frigid in the winter, it's cold, but every jurisdiction has to come up with what works best for them. The reality is when we come out of a product of combustion scenario, we're absorbing those carcinogens very, very fast, and they're going to all of our bloodstream and target organs. And the essence is we've got to stop that as quickly as possible. So for those listeners that maybe have a little bit, EMT or basic life support, paramedic, we've heard in strokes, time is brain. In heart attacks, we've heard time is muscle. So the quicker we intervene, and it's the same with carcinogen reduction, the quicker we remove and stop those carcinogens from being absorbed, the quicker we're going to prevent ourselves from being afflicted with cancer. So just think about what you're doing in your system. I know a lot of systems have approached this differently. Some of the metro departments have decontamination units. Others have, particulate blocking hoods. Others have second sets of gear. In every jurisdiction has their own challenges, right? So some departments struggle to get one set of gear, and I get that. But we have to do what we can do. So it's important for your department, as you're listening, to look at what can you do on scene quickly to stop that exposure once you've been in that environment. So put that on your radar screen. It's something that you've got to work through as an individual department, whether you're volunteer, career, or combination.
Chief, I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. For like 2 years, 3 years ago, the cancer thing really had a lot of traction in the fire service across the country. And I don't know if it's me. I know a lot of fire departments have taken steps to do good, better, best practices. But it seems like in the last year, a lot of the momentum seems to have slowed. You don't seem to have the number of fire departments as interested in the subject as they were, let's say, even just a year ago. And I know, look, the fire service is huge in the United States. It's very diverse. I understand all that. And we have to kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time. Do you agree that we've slowed our progress in the last year or so? Or is it just nobody's talking about it as much as we were 2 years ago?
That's a great question, Ed. Causes me to ponder on my feet, if you will. And I guess I'd answer it this way. I spent a little bit of time learning how to fly. And it's sort of like when you're coming in for a landing, on the approach, sometimes as you shoot the approach, you have to speed up. Then you pull back a little bit to evaluate where you're at, and then maybe add a little bit on the throttle as you continue the approach. So I think this has been a process. I will say, and I know you've been doing this longer than I, and I'm at 34 years. I think we're talking about these issues more so than ever. And here's for me at least, the takeaway for your listeners and our guests. I know you, and I know our audience has probably attended far more funerals. I look at in my department, we have a wall of line of duty, and the majority of them are cancer. So, if we paused a little bit, I think we need to get back and accelerate the efforts, because really everything we're talking about tonight is aimed at prevention. I mean, I don't know if we can ever get to zero cancer deaths in society. In today, I think maybe in the future with science, we'll get there. But in the fire service, we know that percentage, 9%, is based on our exposure. So we've got to really engage in that if we don't want to continue to go to firefighter funerals. And I say that very respectfully, having lost a lot of, as you have, friends and colleagues from occupational cancer. So I think we're on a journey, and we need to, opportunities such as this to continue to educate, increase awareness, and keep people fired up about not just doing what we all love, fighting fire and servicing the community, but protecting ourselves and each other. That's what's going to change the dynamic.
So I think what I'll do with the cancer is I'll have Sam include in the link. We did a good, better, best practices webinar 18 months, 2 years ago. I think I'll have Sam include that in the link to our listeners if they want to go back and watch it or show it to their entire department. So, all right, cancer is important, and I don't want to beat it to death. You talked about a three-pronged approach here. Let's move on to number 2.
Fantastic. So, second, and sometimes we lose focus in this. It was highly focused, and I know we just at IAFC, International Fire Chiefs, looked at what were the 10 highest risks to firefighter survival. And we have to be cognizant that sudden cardiac death continues to be responsible for approximately 1 out of every 2 fire ground events, or immediately after fire grounds. So, within the following 24 hours. So we also know that for every sudden cardiac death, and in a year, that's 50% of our line of duties. But we also, based on estimations by NIOSH and others, we have 17 to 25, 26, 27 additional firefighters that have a sudden cardiac event that's disabling. So that means they didn't die, but they're, I call them cardiac cripples. They can't return to activities of firefighting. They can't, their activities of daily living are impacted. And that really is a game changer. And, I bring that up because we've studied this and we know the majority of those are preventable. And let me just go over with the listeners and our audience. There was a pretty well-defined study on firefighter sudden cardiac death that was done by NIOSH. Great organization, does a lot of great work. And what they found, and the sad part, a couple sad things about this, the average age was 45 years or less. So when we're talking about sudden cardiac death, you normally think of, in today, people 70s, 80s. These were firefighters 45 years of age, mean and less. And some common things stood out among postmortem study and autopsy. One was hypertension. So having poorly controlled, either undiagnosed or just not well managed, high blood pressure increased the risk 12-fold in firefighters. So, all due respect to other professions, school teachers, attorneys, healthcare workers, the essential job functions and the stress and the rigor that we have to perform our duties in elevate that risk of high blood pressure. So that's easily controllable. We have to look for it, manage it, control it. And an increased size of the left ventricle or the left side of the heart, 5 times increase. Again, sadly, easily able to screen for with cardiac ultrasound as part of your physical exam. LifeScan, that's been something we've done for 25 years. It's easy to identify, mostly easy to treat when found early. It's usually better control of blood pressure, loss of weight. Underlying cardiovascular disease, so 7 times fold. So people are walking around with underlying cardiac issues that haven't been identified and treated, and predisposed them 7-fold for a sudden cardiac death. Smoking, I think we've done a good job at addressing that in the fire service from years past, about a 3.5%. But interesting to, of all those numbers, obesity was noted that 63% of the sudden cardiac deaths were obese by weight, weight measurement and weight in proportion to body height and muscle mass. So huge issue. All of those are preventable, addressable. Couple easy factors I want to talk about. One of the biggest contributing factors of some of this is obviously fitness. So our listeners, we have a personal obligation to maintain a fitness status, a level of being able to perform our functions safely. At the same time, nutrition is a portion of this. I'm going to give you some resources tonight. One of them is Harvard University, Dr. Stefanos Kales created a great website, and it's called FIFirE's Mediterranean Pyramid. If you just Google Feeding America's Bravest, so Feeding America's Bravest, it talks about the importance of a couple key elements of addressing some of these issues. One is nutrition and what we can do nutrition-wise, both on duty and off. 2 is water replacement from other type of sugary beverages and other drinks, that alcohol that kind of contribute to some of these issues. The type of fruits and vegetables and whatnot. So check out Feeding America's Bravest. It's a great website that is actually looked at how we as firefighters can make a few pretty simple changes that can keep us around for our family and keep us around for each other. One of the other easy things to do on the cardiac front is hydration status. I don't know how many of our listeners actually focus on their hydration, but the studies that are out there show many firefighters, we show up to work already dehydrated, and that's, caffeine, coffee, alcohol, maybe working out, but having a normal hydration status, it contributes to overall cardiac wellness. So if we're dehydrated, we're more likely to have clotting factors and cardiac issues. So your listeners and your audience, our audience, may actually be familiar with hydration charts. So whether it's in the stations or in a training facility, having a chart so when they urinate, they can actually compare the color of their urine with how either hydrated they are or poorly hydrated or dehydrated they are. And that, believe it or not, makes a difference. The studies have shown that if a firefighter shows up to work dehydrated, it's highly unlikely that they're going to catch up from there when they start having to go to work. So a couple important points. I'm going to move on to the third stool of this triad, and then I'm going to conclude, leave some time for questions with what I've written about in fire engineering as the seat to the stool, which is early detection. But the third leg of the stool is behavioral health. So we know we lose a lot of firefighters, first responders, military from behavioral health. The far end of that spectrum is suicide. We know during the lead up to that, there's a number of progressive challenges from a mental wellness standpoint. Those include stress, sleep, PTSD, post-traumatic injury, addiction, and anxiety, relationship disorders, off the job, financial. All of those are a percolating area where if we don't have programs in place to identify someone that's struggling and then to provide resources, we're really setting that individual and their family up for a very tragic ending. So I know everyone that's listening, Ed, I know you've done this job a long time. I tell people all the time, I would not wish upon anyone to have to see what I've seen and what you've seen and what we've all seen. We get called into the worst time of a person's life, a family's life, when they call 911 and ask us to help. And that takes a toll. The studies have shown particularly repetitive trauma. So if you see it over multiple times, it even is more compounding. We need to acknowledge that behavioral health is a significant, not only risk, but a significant health threat to our first responder community. And having said that, it's a tough issue, right? It's changing. I think you asked about cancer and whether we're upshifting over the last couple of years or downshifting or complacent. And boy, this is just a tough one, right? There's still a stigma attached to behavioral health, and it's one that even when I describe it as a third leg of the stool, we don't know what we don't know about behavioral health, because we don't have, now we've got just rolling out a national cancer registry. We've got a, cardiac idea from NIOSH. But we really don't have great statistics on firefighter behavioral wellness and firefighter suicide. But the anecdotal data that we have tells us it's a big iceberg.
Well, Todd, I'd have to say something I've noticed in the last 18 months to 2 years. The research community and the scientific community and the medical community has really taken the bull by the horns with behavioral health and have done a lot of studies and through grants, they've been able to acquire grants to be able to do it. So, I mean, there's more and more information becoming available, but, the bottom line to anybody that's listening tonight is it's okay to talk to somebody. Okay. I don't care if it's your friend. I don't care if it's a preacher. I don't care if it's a clinician. If you're having a lot of problems related to the job, you need to find a clinician that understands first responders. It's just kind of like, attorneys. If you're filing for divorce, you don't go find an attorney that deals with estate management. Okay. Likewise, if you're on the job and you're having a lot of job related issues, you need to be talking to somebody that understands first responders. And I'm just going to throw a plug in here for our first responder assistance program. It got started with Provident 8 years ago as a result of what they were seeing. And if if you have an A&H policy with us, an accident and health policy, you and your immediate family members are available to use that. If you were to call that number and you're not a client, they're not going to turn you away. I will also tell you the National Suicide Hotline, it changed to 988. I made a phone call when it changed just to see what would happen. When they answered the phone, I hung up. 2 minutes later, my phone rang and the lady said, "You called our suicide prevention hotline. Is everything okay there?" And I simply told her, "Ma'am, I was just checking out to make sure that the phone number worked and somebody would answer the phone." Great. And I want to back up for a minute on the heart attacks. And I'm a major proponent of EMS-based medical surveillance and rehab at incidents. And it doesn't have to be a major fire. It could be, you're in a vehicle accident for an extended period of time and it's 95 degrees and the humidity is 90%. Okay. Rehab. I don't know. I've lost track of the number of firefighters I know who've gone through rehab with medical surveillance there, blood pressure being checked, et cetera, who have been pulled off the line at an incident, told to go to their doctors and found out they had some heart-related issue they didn't even know they had. And it's all because an EMT or a paramedic picked it up during rehab at an incident. And while I'm there, just for our listeners, in August, it looks as though we're going to have AJ Heitman do a webinar specifically addressing the issue on first responder rehab at incidents. So I'm going to shut up now and let you go on.
No, that's beautiful. And you're absolutely right on the behavioral health support. There's a tremendous amount of resources out there, and now's the time to wrap your hands around them and embrace them. And I'm a big proponent of peer support as well. Ed, you mentioned just having someone to talk to and check in on each other. So again, whether volunteer, paid, combination department, training folks to be able just to listen, to know signs and symptoms. I know in Broward, we partnered with a local university just to come in and do a 2-hour just awareness training. So all of the members knew what some warning signs were. So, how to know someone's struggling, and reach out, because we don't teach this in, recruit training or in Proby training. So it's, we've got to look out. I say it all the time, and you and I have spent a lot of time in National Fallen Firefighters and, the Behavioral Health Summit recently up in Memphis. But listen, if we don't, everything, everyone goes home has to be more than a slogan. So we need to give our folks the tools to recognize when someone's struggling.
So one of the most heartbreaking things that happened to me a little more than a year ago, I did a 2-hour presentation on suicide prevention. And I talk about the warning signs and the symptoms of suicide and PTSD and what people should look for. When the class was over, I was approached by a young man who said to me, "I wish you would have been here last month and did this class." And of course, I asked the question, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Our fire chief committed suicide last month. And while you were doing your presentation, we were sitting back there talking about, damn, we missed that one. Gee, look at that." He was doing, 6 of the 10 things I pointed out were all warning signs, but nobody knew about it. Nobody knew about it. And it all came to light in a 2-hour presentation I did. And there's not a lot you can do about it at that point, other than you have the training, the education, now pay attention to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure, like you and like our audience, it's been my experience that when you've had someone struggling, in retrospect, everyone can see it. But we haven't necessarily given them the tools prospectively, meaning what to look for, right? So that's so important for our audience out there. Ed mentioned some tools that Provident offers, and there's NVFC has great tools, IFF. So whatever, reach out, make sure wherever your department's at, you evaluate and say, what else can we put in place? I mean, it's
So
just,
Chief, we have a question here I'm going to throw at you because it's kind of right on point right now. Wayne Grimsley has a question. So many great bullet points. How do we get more youthful firefighters to see the reality of all aspects of the job? We all wear S on our chest, bulletproof, jump from the buildings in a single bound. I'm trying to be a disciple if anyone will listen. What advice do you have for Wayne?
yeah, that's a great question. And I guess I could try to tackle it on the macro level, but I'll even do, I think, a lower dive than that. I, as you know, have been a disciple, I guess, going all over the country for the last 30 years, preaching health and wellness and safety. And, 30 years ago, I'd have one person in the room. In today, it's standing room only on this topic. So I think you have to lead by example, convert one person at a time, because literally those conversions, if you have one new firefighter that sees we need to change our culture with regards to some of the issues we've talked about tonight, those become the informal leaders. And they become the next generation. And I think the service, right, is changing as well. We're incorporating a lot of this in our recruit training, our chief officer training. But for the specific question, I think you have to be that role model. You have to lead by example. You have to, while it's tough at times, you have to, uphold personal accountability when folks aren't, if you've got folks that are coming out of a fire or they're in a, IDLH and they're not on respiratory protection, or they're not taking decontamination seriously, you're going to be going to their funeral in maybe 20, 25 years, unfortunately. So we need to And it's not popular sometimes, right? We all know that leadership is not a popularity contest, but we need to lead by example, educate, advocate, and explain that today's actions result in tomorrow's consequences. And I'd also, one point we don't talk about a lot is get the family involved, right? The families. So I've seen some of the most successful programs in the country have educated the families, spouses in particular, that, these are completely manageable risks. I mean, and I say this with a heavy heart, but most every line of duty funeral I've been to, at least in my department, when I look back, if we were honest, likely could have been prevented with preventative intervention. So I think that would be my humble answer to that very difficult question.
And I think sometimes, Chief, we have a tendency to glamorize the job, whether it be in advertising, when we go out and do recruiting and retention programs, recruiting programs. Being honest with people goes a long way, and telling it like it is. And I know there's a fear that if you take a young kid and you tell him about all the things he or she could be exposed to and what the ramifications could be, you may scare them away. But at the same time, we're being honest about the hazards of the job, and not only cancer and the heart attacks and the stroke and the mental, the behavioral health aspect of it, but just being honest with them and let them know there are resources here and things you can do to prevent it. I did a cancer class last year, and I had a guy. This was a career department, been on a job 20, 25 years. Hey, look, I've been doing this for 25 years and I don't, and it's too late for me now. And I said, well, you know what? You might be right, but let's think about this for a second. Let's look at it from this perspective. There were a lot of people who worked the rubble pile after 9/11 who got cancer. But there's also a large number of people that work the rubble pile that have not been diagnosed with cancer. Likewise, years ago in Boston, they had a lot of firefighters were diagnosed from cancer from the result of one incident they went to. Mm-hmm. But there was an equal number of people that were on that same job that don't have cancer today. So if you take the steps to prevent it, to reduce the risk, as you said earlier, we're never going to completely eliminate it from our job because we're firefighters. I mean, the only way we eliminate that potential is not to go to fires.
Yeah, that's not gonna, right? So
but I think sometimes we're not honest with our people, especially youngsters.
For sure.
And Wayne says, thanks for your advice. I'm an old firefighter. I don't mind making people mad, or agitating the leadership. And sometimes that's what it takes. You just, you got to just keep plugging away with it, and you got to be willing to be honest. And you don't have to be mean to be honest.
That's for sure.
The facts are there. The facts are there. The other thing, Wayne, I'd point out to you is this. I learned this a long time ago. You can't be an expert in your own backyard. But you find somebody that lives in another state who comes in and says the exact same things you're saying to people, Wayne. People are going to have an epiphany. They're going to go, oh my heavens, did you hear what he said? Did you hear what he just said? And Wayne, it may very well be the same things you've been saying for the last 5 or 10 years in your own department. So
it's some great points.
Thanks Absolutely. For the question, Wayne. Well, Todd, I'm going to let you continue with your presentation.
And I'm just going to finish. I promised you I'd finish a little bit earlier than the full hour, and I want to do that, keep the promise. But I just want to, and I guess this is selfishly, since I work for LifeScan, we're the largest provider of firefighter physicals, but I also sit on NFPA 1582 technical committee, and I've also implemented physicals in my department and helped a lot of other departments implement physicals in a very proactive way. So not looking to harm anyone or keep anyone from serving. But everything we've talked about tonight, whether that's cardiac underlying issues, whether that's cancer lurking within, or whether that's behavioral health struggles, there's beautiful screenings that are out there for each of those, that if we find them early, we can intervene. Cancer, if you find a stage 1 cancer in almost every instance, survivability is 90 percentile. If you find it once it's spread and you have symptoms, it goes off the cliff. Cardiac, we know 80% of our deaths have underlying, they call it subclinical, but basically that means you've got underlying cardiac disease that hasn't been identified or treated. In behavioral health, someone just, for the most part, doesn't wake up one day and commit suicide. There's a crescendo of behavioral health precursors. And we've got evidence based that, our physical, whether you use LifeScan or whoever you use, it should be occupationally based, but that addresses the specific early detection of the threats that first responders face. So, hopefully tonight we touched on prevention, actually recognition and awareness. Large portion of this is prevention and behavior modification. So, cardiac, weight, all the preventable modifiable factors we talked about. And then early detection is a huge part of this, that if we identify there's a health issue or behavioral health struggle, if we do it early, it has a beautiful outcome. We intervene, we address it, and you continue your service, and it allows for just a great career, more time with family, retirement. So huge issues. They're sometimes not easy to talk about. For myself, I have dedicated much of my career to trying to change one person at a time with these, as I know you have, and I appreciate you all giving this forum tonight to kind of shine light on these topics, because I know myself and the rest of the fire service, it gets fatiguing to read, a NIOSH report on, another fatality from the same preventable cause. When largely, if we can get the items we talked about tonight in place, that we can prevent many, if not most of them.
To your point, early detection, and you get the early detection. I'm going to say this one of two ways, like going to a doctor on a regular basis, or when there's something not right with you, your system, when you're not feeling well, when you're off, whatever it might be. Okay. Go to the doctor, and I'm going to have Sam include something in here regarding Detect Together. Another organization from up in the Northeast has gotten all over this. Heather and all her people have gotten all over this. There's little short videos that you can take advantage of through Detect Together. And at the end of the day, it's early detection. And early detection comes one of two ways: an annual physical, and when you're not feeling right, go see a doctor. If it lasts more than 10 days, go see a doctor. You have changes in your bowel movements and you don't know why, go see a doctor. for the gentlemen that are on here tonight, if testicular cancer is at the top of the list, then you should be doing an inspection every morning you take a shower. And if you feel a lump that doesn't belong there, go see your doctor. I just went through that myself. Scared the daylights out of me. In July, I noticed a lump that shouldn't have been there. The following week, I went to my doctor. I went to a urologist. They did blood work for cancers to check for cancer markers. There weren't any there. They did an ultrasound. He wasn't too concerned about it being cancerous. On March the 29th, I went in and had surgery and had the lump removed. Guess what? It wasn't cancer. But because of that daily inspection on the Netherlands, if you will, I noticed something that didn't belong there. And I didn't fool around with it. I went to the doctor. As it turned out, it was a blockage it was a growth on the epididymis, okay? The medical term is about 3 miles long. The bottom line was early detection. Early detection. So, and iChiefs has a checklist that you can take to your doctor and ask them. It's a physician's checklist that points out some extra things they should be checking out. Folks, you need to make sure your doctor knows you're a firefighter, volunteer or career. Your doctor needs to know you're a firefighter. When I explained to the urologist about the rates of testicular cancer with firefighters, he had no idea that statistic even existed. Now, every time he writes anything on my chart, he uses the word firefighter in the chart. So,
beautiful. Yeah, for our audience listening to this, Ed mentioned a resource from IFC, and it's been co-branded with IFC, NVFC, IFF. So all the fire services is on board with it, but it's the Healthcare Providers Guide to Firefighter Physicals. So if you just Google that, Healthcare Providers Guide to Firefighter Physicals, it's a short front and back. You can hand it to your healthcare provider, and as Ed said, it gives them a quick why you're different than all their other patients and what tests additionally they should consider.
I'll get it to Sam overnight or first thing in the morning, and we'll have him included in the links that go out tomorrow.
Beautiful.
So I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, and I don't see any comments to answer any questions. And I don't want to just shut things down. I'll give everybody a second or two, or a few seconds anyway, if they have a question or here's something that popped up. All right. Rich Wagner, can't wait. Very informative. Can't wait for the PowerPoint slides. We'll get them out to you tomorrow as part of the link within the next day or two. I don't see anything else in the chat with anybody. Nothing else popping up in the chat. Chief, do you have any final words for our listeners tonight?
No, I just want to thank everyone that tuned in. I apologize for, I know this was pre-scheduled. I ended up having surgery, so we had that in the reschedulement. So I hope we added some food for thought within your own circles and your departments. The team will get the PowerPoint out, and my contact as well. Please feel free to reach out. And I know sometimes it's challenging with only an hour, but if we spark something tonight that raised some thoughts, or how do you implement or maybe think about within your departments, please reach out, and I'm happy to help.
There we go. Chief, I want to thank you for an informative presentation tonight. I'm hopeful our listeners will take heed and pay attention to their health. All right, take some action. We'll be uploading this evening's presentation to the Provident YouTube page. As a reminder, there will be a short 5-question survey at the end of the program. Please take the time to complete it. I'll be sending certificates of participation to the email address you use when you registered for the webinar. And the point I want to make here is, if you put a phony name in the registration, your certificate will show up with a phony name, which is okay. That's fine. That's not a problem. But don't get mad at me if you have the wrong name on your certificate. And you'll also receive an email with links to LifeScan Wellness, the PDF copy of the slides tonight, and any other links we think may be appropriate to this. If you have any questions or need additional resources from today, or you have an idea for a future webinar, please email us at info@providentins.com. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. This wraps up another Provident webinar. Please join us on May the 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be interviewing John Oates from the International Public Safety Data Institute to discuss the importance of data collection and the analysis. Until then, stay safe for your family's sake.